I never thought my own mother-in-law would try to buy my baby. Let me back up because honestly, even saying those words out loud makes me feel like I'm living in some twisted soap opera. But this is my life right now. This is what my family has become. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago I gave birth to the most beautiful baby girl in the world. We named her Emma. She has these tiny, perfect fingers, and when she looks at me with those big blue eyes, I swear my heart could just burst. Being a mom has been the most incredible, exhausting, amazing experience of my life. My husband Jake and I had been trying for almost 2 years to get pregnant. 2 years of disappointment, of negative tests, of watching everyone around us announce their pregnancies on social media while we smiled through the pain. So when we finally saw those two pink lines, we were over the moon. We cried together in our bathroom at 6 in the morning, holding each other and just sobbing with joy. Jake is, or was. I don't even know anymore. He's a good man. At least I thought he was. We met in college, got married 3 years later in this beautiful ceremony by the lake. His family has money, like serious money. His mother, Patricia, comes from old money, the kind where your great-great-grandfather built railroads or owned half of Manhattan or something. She married Jake's father, who built his own empire in commercial real estate. When Jake's father died 5 years ago, Patricia took over the business. And she's been running it like a queen ever since. The woman is 72 years old and sharper than most people half her age. She's intimidating as hell. Always perfectly dressed, never a hair out of place, and she has this way of looking at you that makes you feel like you're being appraised and found wanting. Our relationship has always been complicated. She never thought I was good enough for her precious only son. I came from a middle-class family. My dad was a high school teacher, my mom worked at the library. We were happy, we were comfortable, but we definitely weren't country club material. Patricia made that clear from day one, but Jake loved me and I loved him and we made it work. We got married despite her barely concealed disappointment. We built our life together. And when I got pregnant, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would change. Maybe a grandchild would soften her. I was so naive. The first few months after Emma was born were a blur. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, learning to breastfeed, all of it. Jake was amazing during those early weeks. He took paternity leave. He did the night feedings when Emma would take a bottle. He held me when I cried from exhaustion and hormones. Patricia visited exactly twice in those first 3 months. Both times she stayed for less than an hour, held Emma like she was a fragile piece of china, made some comments about how the baby had the family nose, and then left. She sent expensive gifts, sure. A designer bassinet, organic cotton onesies that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, a stroller that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. But she wasn't really present. I told myself I didn't care. That we were better off without her hovering and criticizing. That Emma would grow up knowing love even if her grandmother was cold and distant. And then everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were when I tried to get out of the house with Emma, just to maintain some sanity. We'd been to a mom and baby yoga class, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. Emma had only cried once, and I'd actually managed to do a few of the poses without feeling like my body was completely broken from childbirth. I came home to find Jake sitting at the kitchen table with this strange look on his face. Not quite happy, not quite worried. Something in between that I couldn't read. He said Patricia wanted to have dinner with us that weekend. Both of us. She said she had something important to discuss. My stomach dropped. In our 7 years together, Patricia had never invited us to dinner to discuss anything. She summoned you when she wanted something, sure, but she phrased it as an invitation. This felt different. I asked Jake if he knew what it was about. He shook his head, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. That's when I knew he was lying, or at least not telling me everything. The next few days, I couldn't shake this feeling of dread. Something was coming, something big. I could feel it in my bones. Saturday arrived and we drove to Patricia's estate. And yes, I mean estate. The woman lives in this massive colonial house about 40 minutes outside the city, complete with gardens and a fountain and probably a few ghosts of robber barons past. Emma fell asleep in her car seat on the drive, and I was grateful. At least one of us would be peaceful during whatever was about to happen. Patricia greeted us at the door wearing pearls. Of course she was wearing pearls. She kissed the air near Jake's cheek, gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and cooed over Emma, who was still blissfully asleep. Dinner was excruciating. We made small talk about nothing. The weather, the gardens, some charity gala Patricia was organizing. I pushed food around my plate and tried to calm the anxiety building in my chest. Finally, after dessert was cleared and we were sitting in her formal living room with coffee I was too nervous to drink, Patricia got to the point. She said she'd been thinking a lot about the future, about her legacy, about what would happen to the family business when she was gone. Jake is her only child. His father was an only child too. There are some distant cousins somewhere, but no one close. The business, the money, the properties, all of it would eventually go to Jake. But Patricia said she'd been reconsidering her timeline. She was getting older. She wanted to enjoy her retirement, travel, spend time on her hobbies. She was tired of the day-to-day grind of running the company. My heart started beating faster. Where was this going? She turned to Jake with this smile, this calculated smile, and said she wanted to hand everything over to him. Now, not in some distant future, but within the next 6 months. She would transfer controlling interest in the company, set up the trust funds, make him CEO. Everything. Jake's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. This was what he'd been working toward his entire life. He'd been groomed since childhood to take over the family business. He'd gotten his MBA from Harvard, worked his way up through different departments, proven himself over and over. And now his mother was finally ready to hand him the keys to the kingdom. I should have been happy for him. Part of me was. But that feeling of dread was getting stronger. And then Patricia dropped the bomb. She said there was one condition. One small requirement that she needed Jake to agree to before she would move forward with the transition. The room got very quiet. I could hear the antique clock on the mantel ticking. Patricia looked at me, then at Emma sleeping in my arms, then back at Jake. She said she wanted joint custody of Emma, not visitation rights. Not to be involved in decisions. Joint legal custody. Equal say in every major decision regarding our daughter's upbringing. Where she went to school. What doctors she saw. What activities she participated in. What values she was taught. Everything. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. It was so absurd that my brain couldn't process it as a serious statement. I thought she was joking. Some kind of weird test or dark humor that rich people found funny, but she wasn't laughing. Neither was Jake. That's when I realized Jake had known. He'd known this was coming. That look on his face when he told me about the dinner. The way he'd been quiet and distant the past few days. He'd known. I looked at him and asked if he knew about this. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. He had the decency to look ashamed. He said his mother had mentioned she wanted to discuss Emma's future. He said he didn't know she'd ask for this specifically, but he knew it would be something big. Patricia cut in smoothly, like she was negotiating a business deal. She said this wasn't about taking Emma away from us. She said she simply wanted to ensure her only grandchild was raised with the proper values, education, and opportunities. She said that as the future heir to the family fortune, Emma deserved to have input from all stakeholders in her development. Stakeholders. She called herself a stakeholder in my daughter's life. I felt my blood boiling. I held Emma tighter, and she stirred in her sleep, making those little baby noises that usually melted my heart. But right then, all I felt was rage. I told Patricia absolutely not. No way in hell. Emma was our daughter, mine and Jake's, and no amount of money was worth selling custody of our child. Patricia didn't even blink. She said she understood this was unexpected and we should take time to think about it. But she wanted us to really consider what we'd be turning down. Financial security for life. A position of power and influence. The ability to provide Emma with everything she could ever want or need. She made it sound so reasonable. So logical, like I was being irrational for not wanting to hand over parental rights to my infant daughter. I stood up. I said we were leaving. I didn't care if it was rude, didn't care if I was making a scene. I started gathering Emma's diaper bag with shaking hands, and Jake didn't move. He just sat there, looking between his mother and me like he was actually considering this insanity. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. The drive home was silent. Emma woke up and fussed, and I sat in the back seat with her, soothing her and refusing to look at Jake. When we got home, I took Emma straight to the nursery to feed her and put her to bed. Jake followed me. He said we needed to talk about this. He said we couldn't just dismiss it out of hand. I asked him if he was serious. If he was actually considering giving his mother legal custody rights to our baby. He ran his hands through his hair, this thing he does when he's stressed. He said it wasn't that simple. This was his inheritance we were talking about, his life's work. Everything he'd been preparing for. I said our daughter wasn't a bargaining chip. She wasn't a business transaction. He said he knew that, but we had to be practical. Think about Emma's future. With the money and resources from the company, we could give her everything. The best schools, the best opportunities, travel, culture, everything. I said we could give her something better. Parents who didn't sell pieces of her childhood for money, the fight escalated from there. We said things we couldn't take back. He accused me of not understanding what this opportunity meant. I accused him of valuing money over his own child. It got ugly. Emma started crying from all the noise. I picked her up and locked myself in the nursery with her. I sat in the rocking chair, holding my baby girl, and cried. How had we gotten here? How had the man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, become someone who would even consider this? The next few days were tense. Jake slept in the guest room. We barely spoke except about logistics with Emma. He went to work, came home late, buried himself in his laptop. I took care of our daughter and tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Patricia called me. I don't know how she got my cell number. We'd never exchanged numbers directly, but of course she had it. She probably had a file on me somewhere with my entire life history. She wanted to take me to lunch, just the two of us. Woman to woman, she said. Every instinct told me to say no. But I was curious. And maybe, stupidly, I thought I could reason with her. Make her understand how insane this was. We met at this expensive restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices and everyone speaks in hushed tones. Patricia was already seated when I arrived, looking immaculate as always. She ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. That should have been my first clue that this conversation wasn't going to go how I hoped. She started by saying she understood my resistance. She said when she was a young mother, she'd been protective too. But she'd learned over the years that raising a child, especially a child who would inherit significant wealth and responsibility, required a village. I said Emma wasn't inheriting anything yet. She was 6 months old. She needed her parents, not a corporate board. Patricia smiled that cold smile. She said I was thinking too small. She said Emma was born into a legacy, whether I liked it or not. The family name came with expectations and obligations. She needed to be raised to understand that. I asked her why this mattered so much. Why she couldn't just be a grandmother, involved and loving, without demanding legal control. That's when her mask slipped a little. She leaned forward and her voice got hard. She said she'd made mistakes with Jake. She'd been too lenient, let his father coddle him too much. She'd allowed him to marry me, someone who didn't understand their world, and look where that had gotten them. She wasn't going to make the same mistake with Emma. The insult was so casual it took my breath away. I was the mistake. I was the problem. I told her she was unbelievable. That her son was a grown man who made his own choices. That Emma was my daughter, and I would die before I let her turn my baby into some cold, calculating robot like herself. I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth, but I was so angry I couldn't help it. Patricia didn't even flinch. She just dabbed her mouth with her napkin and said I should think very carefully about what I was willing to sacrifice for my pride. She said if we didn't agree to her terms, she would leave everything to charity. Jake would get nothing, and she would make sure every door in their industry was closed to him. She had that kind of power, she reminded me. She could destroy his career with a few phone calls. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about revenge, about punishing us, punishing me for not falling in line. I left without touching my food. I sat in my car in the parking garage and shook with anger and fear. When I got home, I told Jake everything. Every word his mother had said. The threats, the insults, all of it. I thought it would snap him out of whatever spell he was under. I thought hearing how she'd threatened to destroy him would make him realize how toxic this all was. Instead, he got quiet. Really quiet. Then he said maybe we should consider a compromise. My heart sank. He said we didn't have to give her full joint custody. Maybe we could agree to consult her on major decisions. Keep her informed and involved. Make her feel like she had a say without actually giving her legal power. I said that wasn't the point. The point was that she was trying to manipulate us, to control us through our daughter, and any compromise would just be feeding into that. He said I was being stubborn, that I was letting my pride get in the way of Emma's future. That's when I realized something terrible. Jake wasn't on my side anymore. Maybe he never had been. He'd been raised by Patricia, molded by her, taught that money and power were the most important things in life. And when push came to shove, that's what he was choosing. I asked him point blank what he wanted to do. He wouldn't look at me. He said he thought we should accept his mother's offer, that we could make it work, that the benefits outweighed the costs. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This was my husband, the father of my child, the man who'd promised to love and protect us. And he was willing to sell our daughter's autonomy for money. I told him no. Absolutely not. I would never agree to it. He said I was being unreasonable, that I didn't understand what we were turning down. I said I understood perfectly. I understood that his mother was a controlling narcissist who wanted to own our child like she owned everything else in her life. And I understood that he was too weak to stand up to her. That fight was worse than the first one. He said things about my family, about my background, things that sounded like they'd come straight from Patricia's mouth. I said things about his spine, or lack thereof. We both knew something had broken between us that couldn't be fixed. The next morning, I packed a bag for Emma and myself. I told Jake I was going to stay with my sister for a while. I needed space to think. He didn't try to stop me. My sister Lisa lives about an hour away with her husband and 2 kids. She'd always been my rock, my person. When I showed up on her doorstep crying with a baby and a diaper bag, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside and made tea and let me fall apart. When I finally told her everything, she was furious. She wanted to drive to Patricia's house and give her a piece of her mind. She said Jake was being an idiot. She said I should get a lawyer immediately, that word. Lawyer. It made everything feel so real, so final, but she was right. I needed to protect myself and Emma. If Jake was actually considering Patricia's offer, I needed to make sure I had legal protection. I found a family law attorney through a friend of Lisa's. Her name was Rebecca Chen, and she was exactly what I needed. Smart, no nonsense, and absolutely appalled by what Patricia was trying to do. She explained that Patricia had no legal standing to demand custody rights. Emma was my and Jake's biological child. We were married. There were no abuse or neglect issues. A grandparent couldn't just demand custody because they wanted it. But she also warned me that if Jake agreed to it, if he signed legal documents giving his mother those rights, it would be much harder to fight, especially with their resources. They could tie me up in court for years. The best thing I could do was make sure Jake didn't sign anything. And if it came down to it, I needed to be prepared to fight for full custody myself. The thought of divorcing Jake made me feel sick. Despite everything, I still loved him. Or I loved who I thought he was. I didn't want Emma to grow up in a broken home. But I also couldn't stay in a marriage where my husband was willing to sacrifice our child for his inheritance. Rebecca said I didn't have to make any decisions right away. But I should be prepared. Document everything. Keep records of all conversations with Patricia and Jake. Build my case just in case. I spent 2 weeks at Lisa's house. 2 weeks of taking care of Emma, crying when she napped, and trying to figure out what I wanted my life to look like. Jake called every day. At first, I didn't answer. Then I started picking up, hoping maybe he'd come to his senses. He said he missed us. He said the house felt empty without Emma's crying and my presence. He said he'd been thinking a lot. I asked if he'd changed his mind about his mother's offer. There was a long pause. He said he'd been talking to Patricia. They'd been working on a modified proposal. Something that might work for everyone. My hope died. I asked what that meant. He said Patricia had agreed to drop the legal custody demand. Instead, she wanted to be named as Emma's guardian in the event something happened to both of us. And she wanted to set up a trust for Emma's education and future, but she would control the trust until Emma turned 25. He said it like he'd won some great victory. Like he'd negotiated Patricia down to something reasonable. I said it was still about control. Still about Patricia having power over our daughter's life and future. He said I was being paranoid. That this was normal for wealthy families. That trusts and guardianship arrangements were standard. I said nothing about our situation was standard. His mother had tried to buy custody of our baby, and he was acting like setting up a trust was a compromise. He got defensive. Said I was twisting everything. Said he was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone and I wasn't even trying. I asked him a question I'd been afraid to voice. If it came down to choosing between his mother's money and his daughter, what would he choose? He said it wasn't that simple. It wasn't black and white. But his non-answer was an answer. I told him I wanted him to really think about what he was doing. About what kind of father he wanted to be. About whether he wanted to be a partner to me or an extension of his mother. Then I hung up. That night, I held Emma while she slept and made a decision. I wasn't going to let Patricia win. I wasn't going to let Jake sacrifice our daughter's freedom for money, and if that meant I had to fight both of them, then that's what I'd do. I called Rebecca the next morning and told her I wanted to file for legal separation. I wanted formal custody arrangements in place before Jake could do anything stupid. I wanted to protect Emma. Rebecca said she'd start the paperwork immediately. I also did something else. I reached out to a journalist friend from college. Her name was Monica, and she worked for a major newspaper covering business and society news. I told her everything. The whole sordid story of Patricia's offer, Jake's consideration of it, the threats, all of it. Monica was shocked. She said it was exactly the kind of story people needed to hear, the dark side of wealth and privilege, the way money could corrupt even family relationships. She asked if I was sure I wanted to go public. It would get messy. Patricia would come after me with everything she had. I said I was sure. Maybe if the story got out, if there was public pressure and scrutiny, Patricia would back down. And if nothing else, there would be a record. Emma would someday know that I fought for her. The article came out on a Thursday morning. It went viral within hours. The headline was something like, "Grandmother demands custody rights in exchange for inheritance." Monica had done an incredible job. She'd verified everything, gotten quotes from legal experts about how unusual and inappropriate Patricia's demands were, painted a picture of a controlling matriarch trying to buy her grandchild. She'd kept me anonymous, referring to me only as the mother, but anyone who knew our family would be able to figure it out. My phone exploded. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, texts from old friends who'd seen the article, emails from strangers offering support or criticism, and then Jake called. He was furious, absolutely livid. He said I'd betrayed the family, that I'd aired private matters in public, that I'd humiliated his mother and destroyed any chance of reconciliation. I said good. I said I wanted everyone to know what kind of person Patricia was, what she'd tried to do. He said I'd made a huge mistake, that Patricia was talking to her lawyers, that there would be consequences. I said bring it on. I had my own lawyer, and I had the truth on my side. He said I was destroying our family. I said he'd already done that when he chose his inheritance over his daughter. That was the last real conversation we had. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions and media attention. Patricia released a statement through her lawyers calling the article defamatory and full of lies. She said she'd simply wanted to be involved in her grandchild's life, and I'd twisted it into something sinister. But the damage was done. People were talking. Other families started coming forward with their own stories of Patricia's controlling behavior. Business partners who'd been bullied. Employees who'd been mistreated. The perfect image she'd cultivated for decades started to crack. Jake filed a countermotion for custody. His lawyers painted me as unstable, vindictive, willing to exploit my own child for media attention. They said I'd violated Emma's privacy by going public, that I was an unfit mother. It was brutal. Every day brought new accusations, new legal filings, new attacks on my character, but I had something they didn't expect. Support. The article had resonated with people. Mothers who dealt with controlling in-laws, people who'd been manipulated by wealthy family members. They rallied around me. A legal defense fund was set up by strangers. Other lawyers reached out offering pro bono help. Patricia and Jake had money, but I had people. The custody hearing was set for 3 months out. In the meantime, we had temporary arrangements. Emma stayed with me. Jake got supervised visitation twice a week. He showed up for every visit, but it was awkward and painful. He'd hold Emma and look at me like I was a stranger. Like I was the enemy. Maybe I was. Patricia tried one more time to reach out. She sent a letter to Lisa's house. It was handwritten on her expensive stationery, and it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever seen from her. She said she'd perhaps been too aggressive in her approach, that she'd let her desire to protect the family legacy cloud her judgment. She said she still wanted to be part of Emma's life, that she was willing to drop all the legal demands if I would just agree to regular visitation and some input on major decisions. It was manipulative as hell, trying to sound reasonable while still asking for control. I didn't respond. The custody hearing finally arrived. I'd been dreading it and preparing for it in equal measure. Rebecca had coached me on what to expect, how to stay calm, how to present my case. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Jake was there with his team of expensive lawyers. Patricia sat behind him, perfectly composed as always. I had Rebecca and the truth. The hearing lasted 2 days. Jake's lawyers painted me as bitter and vindictive. They brought up the article, suggested I was using Emma for attention and sympathy. They said Jake was a devoted father who wanted what was best for his daughter. They conveniently left out the part where he'd been willing to give his mother custody rights. When it was my turn, Rebecca presented everything. Emails from Patricia outlining her demands, text messages from Jake discussing the arrangement, testimony from the journalist about how the story came about, and I testified. I told the judge everything. About Patricia's initial demand, about the lunch where she'd threatened us, About Jake's willingness to compromise our daughter's autonomy, I said I didn't want to keep Emma from her father. I wanted her to have a relationship with him. But I needed to protect her from being used as a pawn in his mother's power games. The judge listened to everything, asked questions, reviewed documents, and then she made her ruling: primary physical custody to me. Joint legal custody, meaning we both had to agree on major decisions. Jake would get regular visitation, increasing as Emma got older. And here was the kicker: Patricia was explicitly prohibited from any legal decision-making regarding Emma. The judge said while grandparents could certainly be involved in a child's life, the attempt to leverage inheritance for custody rights showed a concerning pattern of manipulation. I wanted to cry with relief. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for. I still had to co-parent with Jake, but Emma was protected. Patricia couldn't control her. Jake looked devastated. Patricia looked furious. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I'd known they would be. The case had gotten a lot of attention. I made a brief statement, said I was grateful for the judge's decision, that I hoped we could all move forward and focus on what was best for Emma, that I'd never wanted this to become a public battle, but I had no choice when my daughter's well-being was at stake. Patricia and Jake left through a side entrance. No comment. That was 6 months ago. Emma is a year old now. She's starting to walk, babbling constantly, turning into this amazing little person. She has Jake's eyes and my stubborn streak. Jake and I have settled into a careful co-parenting relationship. He picks Emma up every Wednesday and every other weekend. We communicate through a parenting app to avoid arguments. It's cordial but cold. The love we had feels like a lifetime ago. He never did take over Patricia's company. As promised, she left everything to charity. Set up some foundation in her late husband's name. Jake still works there, but as a VP, not CEO. I don't know if he resents me for that. Probably. Patricia sends expensive gifts for Emma's birthday and holidays. She's never asked to see her. I think her pride won't allow it. She lost, and people like Patricia don't handle losing well. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing. If I should have tried harder to work something out. If I destroyed my marriage and Emma's relationship with her father's family for nothing. But then I look at my daughter. Free to be whoever she wants to be. Not owned by anyone. Not a bargaining chip or a legacy project. Just a little girl who's loved and protected. And I know I made the right choice. People ask me if I regret going public with the story, if I regret the media circus and the legal battle and all of it. Honestly, no, because staying silent would have meant letting Patricia win. It would have meant teaching Emma that money and power matter more than autonomy and dignity, that you should accept being controlled because it's easier than fighting back. I want her to grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, that when it mattered most, I chose her over everything else. Jake made his choice too. He chose his mother and the promise of wealth over standing up for his daughter. I hope he can live with that. I hope someday he realizes what he sacrificed. As for Patricia, I hear she's still running her empire, still attending her galas, still playing the role of philanthropic society matriarch. The article damaged her reputation but didn't destroy it. People like her are resilient, but she lost Emma, and that's something all her money and power can't fix. I'm rebuilding my life now. I went back to work part-time, doing graphic design from home so I can be with Emma. Lisa has been incredible, helping with childcare and just being there when I need someone. I've even started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee here and there with a guy I met at the park. It feels weird after everything with Jake, but also kind of hopeful. Like maybe I can have a future that isn't defined by this battle. Emma will grow up with questions. Someday I'll have to explain why her father and I aren't together, why she doesn't see her grandmother, why there are articles about our family online. I'm still figuring out what I'll say. How do you explain to a child that her grandmother tried to buy her, that her father was willing to sell, but I have time? For now, she's just a happy 1-year-old who loves Cheerios and peekaboo and doesn't know anything about inheritance or custody battles or family wars. I want to keep it that way as long as possible. Looking back at everything that happened, the thing that still gets me is how quickly it all fell apart. One dinner. One insane proposal. And suddenly the life I thought I had was gone, but maybe it was never really there. Maybe Jake was always going to choose his mother's approval over everything else. Maybe I was always going to be the outsider who didn't understand their world. Or maybe we could have made it if Patricia hadn't pushed. If she'd been content to be a normal grandmother instead of trying to own everyone around her. I'll never know. What I do know is that I'm stronger than I thought I was. That I can survive things I never imagined facing. That I can stand up to people with infinitely more power and resources and not back down. And I know that Emma is worth it. Worth every hard day, every legal bill I'm still paying off, every sleepless night wondering if I made the right choices. She's worth everything. So yeah, my mother-in-law tried to buy my baby. She offered my husband an empire in exchange for control over our daughter. And when I refused, she tried to destroy us. But we're still here. Emma and me, building our life, making our own choices. Free. And that's worth more than all of Patricia's money combined.